Today we have Michael Casey, the engineer on the cloud team, talking about the cloud Docker and all the latest improvements we've added during the last release, which by this time is probably the biggest functional release for cloud Docker DevBox we're actively working on right now. So Michael, feel free to start when you're ready.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Michael Casey. I've been working with Magento and now Adobe for almost 3 years now, about 2.5 years, just over 2.5 years. And I'm a software development engineer on the cloud team in Austin. So just a quick overview. What is Magento Cloud Docker? It's a Docker Compose configuration builder and also has lots of images and good defaults for Magento. Has pre-built Docker containers for PHP, nginx, Varnish, Redis, Elasticsearch, etc. So all the same services that you would have on Magento Cloud, or at least most of them. One thing to note is that Varnish is not on the cloud. We have Fastly instead, which is a little bit like a beefed up version of Varnish. So Varnish is not the exact same as Fastly. There's some differences there, but it does give you sort of that same idea of full page caching. We have a lot of good default configuration settings with Cloud Docker for Magento, so you have a good out-of-the-box experience. You don't have to change too much. And it's historically similar to Magento Cloud, so you really get to have a good testing experience before you push to cloud. You can make sure things work on Cloud Docker, and that gives you a little bit more confidence that it'll work on Magento Cloud as well. Something we are doing as we move forward is to make Magento Cloud Docker more generic and support different types of local development, not just Magento Cloud development. So, but that's still something that we are big on supporting, and so going forward, we'll definitely keep supporting that. So why would you use Magento Cloud Docker? Well, it lets you run Magento locally. It includes all the services you need to run Magento, so you don't have to install a bunch of services on your host machine or manually configure them or cobble together a bunch of different Docker containers. You use Docker, so it simplifies the development setup. You can have different projects with different containers and so on. It includes the functional and application testing frameworks that Magento uses. So you can test and run all that with Magento Cloud Docker. And as I mentioned before, it's great for testing in preparation for moving code to Magento Cloud. So we have this release that we came out with a few months ago, Magento Cloud Docker 1.0. And that was a pretty big release. We released a whole bunch of features, which I'll be previewing here in a minute. Previously, we had all of the Cloud Docker functionality bundled with ece-tools 2002.0. But as of ece-tools 2002.1, now we have Magento Cloud Docker code all in a separate package. So that means that some of the CLI commands have changed, which I will go over in just a minute. But it's pretty much just a reorganization of code. So no functionality was lost or anything like that. In fact, we have a lot of improvements. So what's new with Magento Cloud Docker 1.0? Well, some of the highlights. We have a separate Git repository now, so it's not bundled with ece-tools repository. It's not just a subfolder, it's actually its own repository. We have updated many or all of the containers images that we have, so PHP, nginx, etc., with improvements. We've disabled Cron the Cron container and automatic cron running by default. Of course, those can still be run manually. And we have added a separate post-deploy command. And of course, you can always view DevDocs to see the full change list. And at the end of the slideshow, there will also be more links to DevDocs with backwards and compatible changes and so on. So we separated the package for Magento Cloud Docker out from ece-tools. It used to be bundled. You can see there was the composer name ece-tools. And now we have it separate. It has a separate Git repository. But you don't have to do anything different on your end as a developer, or if you want to have the functionality of Magento Cloud Docker, it is bundled because Magento Cloud Docker is a dependency of ece-tools 2002.1. So it's really just a code reorganization. As far as being convenient, it's still convenient. It'll still be an out-of-the-box experience where you have the code you need automatically. Here's an example of how it was before with ece-tools 2002.0. You can see that the Docker folder within this src directory, you have this Docker folder. As we move to 2002.1, you can see that Docker folder is no longer there. And we now have a separate directory, a separate repository for Magento Cloud Docker. And this is 1.0 with its own code. So like I was mentioning before, some of the commands have changed, and probably the command that you'll run the most is the docker build or the build compose command. And this is what actually generates the docker compose.yaml file with all the configurations you need to run docker compose up. So previously it was vendor bin ece-tools. This was as of ece-tools 2002.0. You had the docker namespace and the build command. Now ec-docker is its own command. It's still vendor bin, but this time it's ec-docker and then build compose. Many of the command line options that you would specify on Docker build also work for build compose, but there are some changes. So it can be good to check. You can just run -h or --help on these, just to make sure if you do have any shell scripts or something that you had specific options with it. It's just good to check, but many of them are similar. But we do have some additions as well, which I'll cover. Here's an example of how it was before with ece-tools 2002.0. We have the vendor bin ec-tools docker build, PHP. Here in this example, I'm running 7.2, and I wanted to do developer mode. And then you can see the configuration was built. And then here's just, you don't have to read everything on this page, but this is just the first few lines of the docker compose.yaml file generated from that command. And then here's doing it with the new way with ece-tools 2002.1, which includes the Magento Cloud Docker 1.0. You can see I'm running ec-docker with build compose, and actually these commands happen to be the same, but there are some changes, some additions as well. But PHP 7.2 mode developer configuration was built, and then here's the docker compose.yaml from the new way with Magento Cloud Docker 1.0. So we've disabled the cron container by default. Cron processing can be pretty intensive, especially if you're running Magento Cloud Docker in a VM. For example, if you're like on a Mac and you're running Cloud Docker on your Mac, then it'll actually go through a VM. And there's some other scenarios. And basically, sometimes you're running multiple machines, or you're running, you're not on a super fast machine or whatever it may be. Cron processing can be pretty intensive, so we disabled that by default for Magento Cloud Docker. Of course, if you're running cron run manually, that's still 100% functional. There's no reason why that won't work. But if for some reason you do want to test crons, or you still like having the crons run automatically just like they would on Magento Cloud, then you can just use the -- with cron command. Option on the build compose command. So that's just a change in default. So you still have that functionality if you like it. Here's an example of how it was before with ece-tools 2002.0. You see the cron container was made, and it's configured, has all the volumes, etc., and then the cron tab. You can see in this case, this cron that I had set up that was running every minute. So that could add quite a bit of load to my development environment. And then here's the default with Magento Cloud Docker 1.0. You can see pattern. I searched for cron, and it says pattern not found cron. And then this is how you would actually get the crons re-enabled again. If you like that old behavior, you want the crons to be automatic, then you can just add -- with cron. And you can see in this case, here it is with the cron container again. So we now version our Docker images that are built from Magento Cloud Docker. Previously, it was just Docker PHP 7.2 CLI without any more version information. But now we actually have major and minor versions on many of these images. So That helps preserve backwards compatibility. If we want to make improvements, then we can go ahead and just increment the version number, and any existing setups you have won't be broken by those changes. So it just helps make the experience better overall. If you are using Magento Cloud Docker and you want to make sure you get the latest updates, all you got to do is run composer update. And the next time you build your config with the config build command, then it will include whatever versions that it has as latest. But any configuration you already have will stay the same, so that won't be broken by anything. See, here is how it was with ece-tools 2002.0. You can see here that here's the old images. You can see throughout here, for example, here's FPM that handles the PHP code, and it has FPM. It doesn't have any version number. Same for build, CLI, etc. And then with Magento Cloud Docker 1.0, now you can see there's 1.0, and yeah, throughout build, FPM, etc. You can browse all the different versions we have on Docker Hub with the Magento user on Docker Hub, but there's not really much need to go browse manually. They are there if you're curious, but really EC Docker and Build Compose will take care of all that for you. So it's not super important that you file through them all, but they are there if you're curious. Here's an example of Docker Hub I picked the PHP container, for example, here. Here's the Magento user, the Magento Cloud Docker PHP image. And you can see we've got one of the versions down there. And if I scroll down, then you can see here's some 1.1 containers that we've released. So actually, we've already been utilizing this to make improvements without making any backwards incompatible changes. Some of the improvements we've made to the PHP image, we include Node.js now by default. So if you have any, it's especially useful during the build process. If you have any like JavaScript compilation or anything like that that uses Node, NPM, or Grunt CLI, then that will work with the PHP image. So you won't have to do any manual changes to your Docker configuration or anything like that. And we now support IonCube, which is if you don't know, it's basically a encryption for PHP code. So none of the official Magento code does this, but if you have any third-party modules that use IonCube for protection, then you can now use those on Magento Cloud Docker out of the box.
Hey, Michael, just a quick note. Currently, the Node version that you're including is Node 8, and that's an old deprecated version that doesn't even receive security support anymore. You might want to bump that to 10.
Okay. Yeah, that was just on my, let me just go to that slide again. That was on my particular environment. I might have been pegged to an out-of-date version there, but I'll make a note of that real quick.
Yeah, actually, when you build the image itself, you get a warning saying that this version 8 is no longer supported and will not get security updates.
Okay. I'll follow up later on Slack with, I'll check that out and see what's going on there. So we've made updates to our web container as well, which is sometimes called the nginx container. You can customize the nginx configuration now without having to do any crazy image name stuff or building. You can follow this documentation here, and I'll show you an example in just a moment, where you can add custom nginx.conf and vhos.conf directives. And also it auto-generates an SSL TLS certificate. So if you're doing testing and you want to test SSL, which is often enabled on pretty much always enabled on Magento sites, then that'll be supported out of the box as well. And here's an example of a custom nginx.conf, or actually the way you would include it. You would just have a Docker Compose override, and then you would say volumes. You would mount the nginx.conf inside the container, and vhost.conf as well. And the DevDocs has more information on exactly how this is done, and also there's some other cool things you can do with that. We've also added a Selenium image to Magento Docker. So this goes into your Docker Compose YAML, and it's useful because that's what Magento functional testing framework uses. So that allows you to use MFTF on Magento Cloud Docker. It's just a command line switch. It's not enabled without this, but you can just do -- with Selenium, and that will build the config with the Selenium container. You can see dev docs for full details on that. One thing we've done is made the database container persistent. So sometimes people like to do Docker Compose down, and they're kind of shocked when their database is gone. So we made it a persistent volume actually. So here's an example. I'll give you some context here. I did Docker Compose up-d, and then I did Docker Compose ps just to show that my containers were indeed running. So then I checked, okay, which volumes do I have? Obviously I wanted that specific namespace, so I just grepped it. But Docker volume ls, grep, and you can see I had 2 volumes associated, that were created as a result of me using this Docker Compose file, db and sync. So if I do Docker Compose down, it's scrolled up here, but I did down without the v. And it removed all those containers, but then the volumes are still remaining. So that's with regular down. And then if you run down -v, which I did here, Docker Compose down -v, you can see it removed the volumes, also removed the networks. But then when I do Docker volume ls, you can see that those volumes are removed. So really, if you're wanting to destroy the database, then you can just do down -v. But yeah, keep in mind that down in general does destroy the containers and everything in them. So we just made the database volume persistent, and then down -v will actually destroy the volume as well. We have a separate post-deploy phase now in Magento Cloud Docker. So previously, you just had build and deploy. And now we have build, deploy, and post-deploy. And that's a lot closer to how it actually works on Magento Cloud, where you have those 3 phases. If you do have any shell scripts that did only build and deploy, then you'll need to update them to do post-deploy right after deploy as well. Here's an example here. Old way would have been bin docker, ec build, ec deploy, and bin docker, which we now renamed to bin Magento Docker. This is like a helper script, which includes a whole bunch of commands like deploy, redeploy, open a bash prompt, etc. These are just helpful commands. You can do up and down and so on. But we renamed it from Docker to Magento Docker so that it didn't conflict with the actual Docker binary itself. But yeah, the old way would have been this way, but now we have post-deploy separated. So actually, it's not like this wasn't existing at all. It was just that post-deploy was bundled in with the deploy command. So it kind of did 2 things in one. Now we separated that out, so you have more control over the process. I'll just show you an example of the code here. So this is the Magento Cloud Docker repository with the commit before we made the change. You can see here's the cloud build and cloud deploy commands. There's no separate post-deploy command. And if we look at this cloud deploy command here, look at the code real quick, at least actually this is all of it. You can see it runs the runhooks deploy and runhooks post deploy. So this is the old version before we made the change. So it was really just doing 2 things in one. And now with the new version, you can see this is branch 1.0 here on the top left. We do runhooks deploy, and that's it. And then we have a separate command. You can see this is the directory for 1.0. We have a separate command for post deploy now. So you won't have to, in most cases, look at this manually. This is just an example of how we made the change inside the system, but you can use that bin Magento-Docker command, and it has the post deploy. So we increased the TLS timeout. So we use Pound as a TLS proxy for Magento Cloud Docker, and Pound has at least the version we were using, the default configuration had like a connection timeout or time between bytes timeout of 15 seconds, And if you were running a particularly complicated site, or if your system was kind of slow, or whatever the case may be, development environments can be varied. It could time out on slower systems. So if you were trying to access the admin panel or something like that, not everyone had this problem, but a few people did. So now it has a default for 300 seconds. So that should be enough to really make sure that the site loads it's fine, which is really nice because I've actually experienced that myself. And this was submitted by Matthew Bean of Zilker Technology, so we appreciate all the contributions from the community, and that's really great to see that type of stuff. So here's an example of the TLS container, the image source code. And of course, this is all built into the image, so you won't have to mess with this most of the time, but it's just an example. We have the pound.cfg now, so that we can actually feed that into the container and have it use that config as opposed to the default. Here's the pound.cfg file. Here's a snippet from it. You can see it has most of the default stuff, but then it also has this variable here for timeout. So previously this was just set to 15 seconds, and now we have it as a variable. And if we look at the Docker file, then you can see env timeout 300. That's our default timeout now. So we've been working on some other things after 1.0, and I have some changes to preview here, which are pretty exciting. One of the bigger ones is the universal configuration file, and that'll let you run Magento Cloud Docker. Ultimately, our goal is to make it so you can run Magento Cloud Docker without needing any of the Magento Cloud specific configuration files. We want to support more use cases for Magento Cloud Docker and make it more of a generic solution across the Magento community. So we're moving towards that, and one of the ways we're doing that is with the universal configuration file. You'll also be able to specify the services and service configs in a config file as opposed to just on the command line with the builder command. So this means you'll have a more repeatable experience. You won't need to have so many options passed around in shell scripts and so on. We're going to have XDebug pre-configured on developer mode by default. So that's great. A lot of people use XDebug, especially when they're developing code. I know I do. So being able to use that with Magento Cloud Docker in a seamless way is a priority. So that'll be really nice for the development experience overall. Of course, the production mode will still be the way it is now, where it's not enabled automatically. And this was submitted by Matthew Bean as well, so thanks for that. We're trying to make it so you don't actually need PHP installed on the host in order to initialize Magento Cloud Docker. Currently, you have to use PHP to run the build compose, the build command, because it actually is a PHP script itself. So we're going to leverage Docker to containerize that build process as well. So we're coming up, I believe we have some shell scripts we're working on where it'll pull the image, it'll run a one-off where it runs the build compose command. So we're going to containerize that config building so you won't need PHP installed on your host machine. The goal is to make it so that all you will need is Docker Compose and Docker. And Bash if you want to run some of the helper scripts. And we're going to make it so automatic Varnish caching is enabled. Currently, when you're going through the procedure on DevDocs for either the developer mode or production mode, there's some manual commands you have to run. Of course, you can just copy and paste these from DevDocs, but there's still manual commands where you have to go and run config set, caching application, etc. And there's another one as well. We want to make this more automatic, so we're going to make this just a built-in part of the build process. So that's something we're working on. It's interesting, we want to make sure that if the container is not present, that we don't select it. So there's some interesting ways we're looking at solving that problem, but that is something we're working on. All right, so takeaways with our changes and updates. We want to have better cross-platform support for Magento Cloud Docker 1.0 across Mac, Linux, and Windows. We're supporting more developer environments. So like whether you are cloning a Magento Cloud repo or whether you're running Magento and you don't have a cloned Magento Cloud repo, we're trying to have more support for that. We want to have a simpler setup process so that you don't need to have so many prerequisites installed or manual commands being run, and just a smoother overall experience. Things like having XDebug enabled, and things not timing out, stuff like that. So just making it a better overall package for development. DevDocs has lots of details. It covers everything I mentioned and more. So you can look here at the release notes, a full list of backwards incompatible changes. Just there, here's the guide for Docker development. And of course, here's the DevDocs link overall, which you can just use a search box and find lots of good stuff. And as always, you can go to the Cloud Docker Slack channel and get help there from the community. And also, we like to help out there when we can as well. And that's all. If you have any questions, you can go and ask now. That'd be great.
Thank you, Michael. I see guys complaining that video delayed. Yeah, I think that's some kind of BlueJeans problems. We will upload this video on the YouTube channel. Hopefully it won't have any delays, but sorry guys for any inconvenience that's things with BlueJeans currently. Thank you, Michael, again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. I've got a question. I noticed that there's not much mention in the documentation of the bin Docker kind of CLI. Is that something that's intended to be well supported going forward?
We've had that there, and we intend to keep it there. So, I mean, I would say yes. I'll need to check with the documentation team and see if we need to add more on that. I think it was originally just a pretty simple command, so with you could just check the source code pretty quickly. I think it might still be so. I'm not sure exactly how much docs we're doing on that, but I'll check on that for you for sure.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question. Is there a plan? Obviously, it's already reading some configuration based on cloud, so the .magento.env.yum file for some things, but not others. So, for example, the default database password is just dumped into the Docker Compose file. But if someone had a cloud configuration where it was already in .magento.env.yaml, it's not doesn't seem to be picking that up. Is there a plan to make that work? Because just because it does pick up so much other cloud configuration, I'm wondering why it doesn't bother to pick up the database password configuration, and if that's something that would become supported.
Okay, so why doesn't it include some of the configurations from .magento.env.yaml?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Particularly the database.
Okay.
Passwords.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know that the Magento env YAML is used by ece-tools during the build process and so on, the deploy process. So we might not have picked up everything and put it into Magento Cloud Docker as well. But I know that going forward, our goal is to have a hierarchy of configuration where, like, for example, the universal configuration I was talking about, it pulls from that, also pulls from the command line options and so on. So I think we're going to try and include the env YAML. I'm not sure. I'll have to check on that, but I'll definitely pass it on to the team and let them know that that's something that we could add for sure.
Cool. If you guys have no other questions, I believe we'll be finishing for today. So if you have other questions later, feel free to ping Michael or any of us on the Slack channel. And see you there. Stay safe and have a great end of the week.
Great. Thanks, guys.